Thanks for checking out this video. I hope it's encouraging to you. I hope it helps you grow in your relationship with the Lord. If you're in the Tulsa area, we would love to have you join us at Christian Chapel so that you could not only grow in your knowledge, but you could grow in your relationships in experiencing God together. If you live in another part of the world, I want to encourage you to take all you can from this resource, but also plug into a community of believers where you live. God's created us not only to know about Him, but to experience Him together. And that's done best in the context of the local church. Hope this blesses you, hope you enjoy it, and I hope God speaks to you through it.
He is our God. He is my God.
He is my God. He heard me and delivered me.
He delivered me. He told me that there will be no other gods, only Him.
No gods of any size, shape, or form.
My worship is for Him and Him alone.
Him alone. He told me, don't bow down to them. Don't serve them, because He is my God.
He is my God. He told me to take His name and His fame seriously.
He told me to remember to set aside a day for thankfulness and prayer.
A day to rest and celebrate what He's done in my life.
Celebrate what He's done in my life. He told me to honor my parents.
He told me not to unjustly hurt others, to honor marriage.
To always tell the truth, and to not be jealous.
But I often fall short. Sometimes I mess up, and I don't live up to these commandments.
I know He heard me and delivered me, but sometimes His demands are too much for me.
There are only 10, but sometimes it feels like there's so much more.
I stumble.
I slip.
I mess up.
I mess up.
So I try to fix it.
I try to fix me by working harder.
I work harder, hoping that my strength will overcome my failure.
I work harder, hoping this time I will finally get it right.
I work harder, praying that this time I will keep my promises to Him. But what happens?
What happens?
When working harder?
When working harder isn't working.
Isn't working.
Good morning. It is good to see you here. We're in week 3 of our message series where we're walking through the 10 Commandments. We've called it When Working Harder Isn't Working. And as we've walked through the last couple weeks, if you've been with us, you remember we've talked about the function of the law, the function of the 10 Commandments. First of all, they're good. This is a description of a good life, a way that we were created to live. The 10 Commandments describe what the people of God should look like and live like in the world. But the second thing we've learned about the law is it is good, but we are not. And so we are helpless to fully and finally fulfill the law on our own. You know, Jesus comes and tells us even if you're meeting the external requirements, that's not enough. You have to meet them internally as well. So do not murder becomes do not hate. Do not commit adultery becomes do not lust. Do not lie becomes let your yes be yes, your no be no. And what we learn, if we're honest with ourselves, is we fail spectacularly and frequently in all of those areas. And so if the law is good and we are not, eventually the weight of the law is going to crush us and it's going to cause us to look for an outside solution. To some, it leads them to a life where they decide, I will make my own laws and live how I want. But the way the scriptures describe the function of the law is it is supposed to burden us down to the point that we look to Jesus as the one who has perfectly and finally fulfilled the law for us. But He does not fulfill it just as a role model to say, I've done it, now you, if you try really hard, can do it too. But instead, His life becomes our life through the power and presence of the Holy Spirit living in us. And so there's an idea that is guiding us as we work our way through the 10 Commandments from a theologian, a pastor named R.T. Kendall. He said, if we were to walk in the Spirit, we would fulfill the law accidentally, even if we had never heard of the 10 Commandments. And so this is our point. This is where we're wanting to start and to settle each week. That your hope, my hope to keep the law does not rest in us, but rests in the power of the Holy Spirit living in us, flowing through us to give us both the desire and the ability to fulfill the law as Christ Himself has because He now lives in us. And so I want us to keep that in mind, especially today as we enter into the 4th commandment. We're going to talk about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is probably one of the easiest ones for us to decide that I can actually do this one on my own, right? And to become very legalistic, very rule-based. Some of you already are like, if you tell me I can't watch an NFL game this afternoon, I will never come back to this church. I promise I won't, because I'm going home to cheer for Patrick Mahomes, the greatest quarterback in NFL history. So if you don't know who that is, you just get on the bandwagon early, okay? I know we're in Cowboys country, but I'm from Kansas, and the Chiefs just hold a special place where they break my heart every year. But anyway, so we're not going to go that route, right? We're not going to go the super legalistic route. But let's read Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. God says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Now, in a lot of ways, the fourth commandment serves as a bridge between the first three, that you're not to have any other gods, you're not to make any idols or images, and you are not to misuse his name, and the last five that have to deal with our relationships with each other. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because the function of the Sabbath is a day of rest and worship. It's a day for us to turn our attention back towards God. And when we turn our attention towards God, we remember there's no one like him. There's no one next to him. He alone is worthy of our worship, that his name has been given to us. And so we want to live out that new identity, right? The Sabbath points us back towards the first three commandments. But then the Sabbath also gives us an opportunity to understand, if God has revealed himself to me this way, and he's revealed himself to you this way, then I now have a responsibility to you, and you now have a responsibility to me to treat each other as fellow image bearers, fellow name bearers of Christ himself. And so that means we're obviously not going to murder each other. It means we're not going to sleep with each other's spouses. It means we're not going to steal from each other. We're not going to lie to each other. We're not going to be jealous of one another. And so the Sabbath then becomes this bridge between these two lands. Of the land where God has revealed himself as high and mighty, unlike anything and anyone, and yet he has come down in his grace and mercy to show us himself. And now the land where we live each day in our daily interactions. And the Sabbath reminds us these two are always connected for the people of God. You cannot be religious one day a week and live how you want the other 6 days of the week. They all belong to the Lord. Right? And so as we start to work through this, we begin to understand that you and I were created for rest. Right? The scriptures teach this to us. Before the fall, we find Adam and Eve in the garden, and they walk with God, and their souls are at rest. They're at peace with God. Now, they still work. They still have jobs to do, but these jobs are not heavy. They're not burdensome. But when sin enters the picture, work becomes toil. Right? And you can see that in Genesis 3, where God tells Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. You will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." Right? And some of us, we can identify with this. Sin makes work a grind. Right? And even if you love your job, you know there are days that you just have to grind it out. You just have to do it. That sweat of, now your thorns and thistles might have names and faces, but you still know what it is for work to be a grind and work to be a struggle. And this is what God is telling Adam. Look, it is a grind, and if you let it, the grind will ground you down to dust. And so Sabbath is part of God's gift to us to alleviate the grind of the work. It's God building in a rhythm of work and worship, of work and rest. He says in Leviticus 23, Moses is explaining the Sabbath to the people, and he's telling them there are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work. Wherever you live, it is a Sabbath to the Lord. Now that Hebrew word that we translate as Sabbath literally means to cease or to rest. It means you're going to stop. And then Moses tells us in Leviticus 23, not only are you going to stop, but you're going to gather together in a sacred assembly. That this day is not to be like all of the other days. It is supposed to be remarkably different for you individually and for you as a community. And that the difference is it's a day for you to just stop, to cease all of your working, to cease all of your striving, all of your efforts. In the Ten Commandments, it points us back. This is an idea that God himself presents to us. He creates everything in 6 days. On the seventh day, he rested. Even in there, there's some brilliance because it's like God anticipates our objection. You don't know how busy I am. He's like, I made the world in 6 days. I think your Excel spreadsheet can wait till Monday, right? I made the world in 6 days. Your work drama is still going to be there when you go in the next day. You can't stop. This world spun before you. It's going to spin after you. So you can stop. He's establishing for us this sacred rhythm of work and rest, of work and worship. Not wanting us to be ground down, not wanting us to settle for a life where we worship ourselves, where we think it's all about us. And he says the way we participate in it is by remembering the Sabbath and keeping it holy. Now when he says remember, he doesn't just mean know when it is. Right? I got married on June 2nd, 2001. I remember that. But if on June 2nd, 2019, all I do is remember that, I have not kept it holy, and I have not kept myself in good standing. Right? If I wake up, Angie, remember, we got married on this day. See you later. Nothing, I mean, you know, maybe some of you have done that. Maybe you didn't even remember. Right? It just kind of slid by. And if it slid by once, it did not ever happen again. Right? We learn from that. And when he tells us, remember the Sabbath, he's not saying know what day it is. Remember means observe. It means participate. It means celebrate. Remember means let this day be a special day for you every single time it occurs. And you keep it holy by participating in it. It's not just something that you know about. It's not just something you talk about, but it's something we live in. God also tells us that the Sabbath is something we are supposed to help each other participate in. He says, on it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or your daughter, your male or female servants, your animals, or any foreigner residing in your towns. And so when it comes to the Sabbath rest, really Sabbath is kind of this great community equalizer. Because it's not just for the rich and the powerful, it's not just for the poor and the oppressed, but it is for everyone, everywhere. We are all brought to a state of rest and worship. And as we are brought to this same status, we are reminded we all stand on equal ground before the Lord. There's a special emphasis, though, given to people in positions of power. Right? In this situation, it's parents, it's landowners, it's business owners. We can translate that pretty quickly to our culture that we have a responsibility to help those who are under our authority establish a rhythm of work and rest. Rest and worship are not just for those who have achieved a certain level of power and authority in their life, but it's for everyone, everywhere. I mean, we see this in our culture. We have some great kind of corporate examples of organizations who have established a pattern of Sabbath rest and decided we'll be open for 6, but we're closed on the 7th. Right? And we admire them. Well, you admire them until like 12:30 today when you really want that Chick-fil-A sandwich. Right? Or some of you ladies, you really need that thing from Hobby Lobby. And you show up and you see the sign on the door, right? I'll tell you what, like, I've been mad at Chick-fil-A. I've never been mad at Hobby Lobby for being closed on a Sunday. In fact, it's like maybe you guys should only be open 1 day a week instead of 6, just because it'll help all of our budgets a little bit more. But, you know, we see this, though, and it's a really beautiful thing. And if that's your only experience of the Sabbath, you will receive some benefit from it. Like if you are not a follower of Jesus in any way, shape, or form, if you will simply incorporate a pattern of work 6, rest on the 7th, your life is going to improve from it. because this is how you've been created by God. And yet for us as followers of Christ, we don't want to settle for just that kind of surface blessing, that surface experience of it, because we believe the law is just a shadow of the things that are to come. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1, it says, the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. And so for us as the people of God, the Sabbath rest is always meant to point our minds back to the rest we had before sin entered the world, and to point our minds forward to the rest we will one day enjoy when Christ returns and we live with him in a new heavens and a new earth. So we're created for rest. Right? It's undeniable as you read through the scriptures. Even your own experience tells you your life is better when you have a regular rhythm of rest and a regular rhythm of work. And if you don't think that's true, just ask the people who are closest to you to describe you when you are tired, stressed, and overworked. Right? And I guarantee not a single one of them is going to say, you just get really kind. You just get so full of compassion and joy. No, they're going to tell you you're short, you're mean, and nobody likes you. Right? You're miserable to be around, and we know that. We've experienced that. And so now we live in this tension where we know we're created for rest, and yet we refuse to rest. We know what's good for us, but either we are unwilling or unable to do it. A couple weeks ago, Angie, my wife, showed me this Whole30 eating plan. And she said, hey, I've been reading through this, and it was probably after one of those days where we had like pancakes for breakfast, burgers for lunch, and brats for dinner. She's like, I've been reading through this. I think it would be good for us. And in the middle of my misery, I kind of read through it. I'm like, yeah, cut this, cut that, cut this, cut that, cut this, cut that. Yeah, that probably would be really good for us. It would be really healthy. I probably don't need 3 brats at lunch and chase it with 2 hamburgers at dinner. Like I'm not 13 anymore, And she said, okay, so when would you want to start it? I said, never. I agree. In theory, it would be good, but then I'm supposed to not have milk and Oreos for 30 days. Like Jesus didn't die so that I would live that kind of miserable life. I am not under the law. I am free. I am healthy. I am whole. I am going to start my positive confession, even if it's only related to junk food, right? So, but we have the same approach to rest. I know it's good for me. I know I should do it. Great. When do you want to start? Never. And there's lots of reasons that we refuse to rest. If we had time, we could probably come up with dozens or even hundreds of them. But I want to give you just a couple to think about this morning. One of the reasons I think that many of us refuse to rest is because we are lazy. Now that might seem like an oxymoron because you think, well, if you're lazy, aren't you kind of like a professional rester? Like that you just exist in a eternal state of rest? Right? Like your couch is proof. It is formed and shaped to you. It's proof that you know how to rest. No, but it's not. Because here's what we know. God established a rhythm of work and rest. And if you pull the work out, it doesn't just become a lifetime of eternal rest, but instead your heart begins to become discontent because you're not living as you were created to live. And so we've had this experience for us at times of you have not done what you were supposed to do during the week. And so you get to your day of rest, your day of worship, and what do you have to do? You have to get caught up on all the things you didn't do. Like all that Monday through Saturday time that was spent binging Netflix and trolling social media and engaging in all these other activities that at the end of the week amounted to absolutely nothing, have taken you away from the things you were supposed to be doing. And now on the day that you're supposed to be resting and worshiping, instead you're playing catch up so you don't get in trouble on Monday morning for the thing that you didn't get done on Friday. And so our laziness at times can prevent us from that. Others of us, it's not laziness, but instead it's a love that borders on worship of our work. You just love it so much. And you would even say, my work doesn't feel like toil. I don't need to take days off because my work is where I get my life, where I get my energy, and in that, even as you're saying it or thinking it, there should be a caution rising up in your spirit of, wow, I'm saying that I'm renewed through my work. I'm saying that I find all my meaning through my work. And it sounds pretty close to worship. And now, this helps us to think of the context in which God gives the Ten Commandments to the people of Israel. They've come out of slavery. For 400 years, they have not had a day off of work. For 400 years, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, their great-great-great-great-grandparents, all they have done is work 7 days a week. They have their quotas that have been given to them by Pharaoh. This is what you have to accomplish. This is what you have to finish. And guess what happens when you get done? Here's your next quota. Go get that done as well. So for 400 years, it's been work, work, work. And they're led out of Egypt. And one of the first things God tells them is, when I take you to the promised land, you're going to stop 1 day out of 7. You're going to work hard. And on the 7th day, you're going to stop. You're going to rest. You're going to gather together, and you're going to worship. Right, now here's what's really interesting is God tells them, when I lead you into the promised land, it's going to be a land flowing with milk and honey. Right? The idea he's presenting is it's going to be a land of abundance. And when you plant your seed, you're going to reap great crops. And when you do business with your neighbors, you're always going to come out on top. You are my people. You're experiencing my blessing. But God recognizes something in us that we don't always recognize in ourselves. The more success we have in our work, the harder it is for us to stop working. And he knows, the Israelites, he knows that they're going to get there and that land's going to be good. And they're going to think, well, if I can make this much money in 6 days, how much can I make in 7 days? Right? If I can have this many people working for me 6 days a week, how many people could I have working for me 7 days a week? If I can build this amount of wealth in 6 days, what could I do if I took that 7th day back? Or maybe even I'll observe the Sabbath, but I'll make sure these underlings, they're working on that 7th day so that my value keeps going up. And God is warning us, don't worship your work. And one of the ways that we make sure we're not worshiping work is we take a day where we just stop. And you just don't do it. And now, for me, for you, this is probably the way that many of us struggle the most with the idea of Sabbath. Well, man, that's a great idea, but you just don't know what my job is like. The text messages never stop coming. The emails never stop coming. There's always another thing. There's always another problem. I know, I get it. And as you follow the Spirit, He will help you navigate that, not in a legalistic way, but in a life-giving way. But it starts with us acknowledging one of the reasons I refuse to rest is because I find so much of my worth and so much of my identity in my work. Which kind of leads us into the next one. Some of us are afraid to rest because we're afraid of what might happen if we do rest. You have this fear that if I stop working, even for a day, right, and as you start to read more of the law, you'll see God, eventually He tells the Israelites, like, hey, every 7 years you're going to give the land a rest, and every 50 years you're going to have this huge celebration where you forgive all debts, and some of that they never even do. They just kind of settle on the Sabbath and think we can do that, we can't do all of the other stuff. But there's always this fear of, if I stop, will the world go on without me? If I don't answer the email, will they ask my coworker and then he'll get the promotion instead of me? If I don't help with the problem, will they go to someone else next time? If I don't answer that service call, will they go to my competitor and I'll lose their business forever? And what God is telling us is just trust me. Just trust me. As you rest and as you worship, your life will improve and I'm going to take care of all your needs. I've noticed for me that rest and worship is actually an area where the enemy will come and attack me and my identity. So there'll be some Sundays where I stay sitting down here by my wife and somebody else comes up to speak. And it's a staff pastor, a missionary, somebody else, and they're doing a great job. And I sit there, and what I should be thinking is, this is awesome. I'm getting to rest. I'm getting to worship with my family. I'm not having to worry about if I say something I'm not supposed to say. Right? Like it's a weight has been lifted. But I can tell you what happened, especially in the early years, was the enemy would immediately come and be like, that guy's doing such a good job, they probably don't even know your name anymore. Right? There's somebody back in the back, and all they're thinking is, I wish he was here every Sunday instead of Chris. Right? And then I'd walk out of this service, and somebody would say, man, Chris, thanks for having that guy. That's the best sermon I'd ever heard. Like, really? You know, and so if I give into that, what it does is it tells me I've got to be here 52 Sundays a year. Right? Because this is where all my value comes from. This is where all my worth comes from. And you do this, I do this in a dozen different ways. Man, if I say no this time, they might not ask me next time, and I really do enjoy that. If I turn down this opportunity to serve on that committee, then they might just move on to the next person. They'll be better than me, and I'll be stuck in obscurity forever. But what the Lord is teaching us with Sabbath is just build in a rhythm of rest and a rhythm of worship. And as you do that, what you're going to start to learn is He's going to take care of you. He's going to satisfy your soul. He's going to keep you at peace. And so we're created for rest. We refuse to rest. And then Jesus comes and begins to show us how we can be finally at rest, how we can live in this new space. So if you look at Mark chapter 2, you find this story of Jesus and his disciples. It's on the Sabbath day, and they are walking through some grain fields. And there's a group of Pharisees who are watching them. Now, the Pharisees are the religious leaders. They are the rule keepers. They're the ones who say, no, on the Sabbath, you can walk this far and it's not work, but if you take another step, then it is work. You can cook this kind of meal, but not that kind of meal. You can help in this situation, but not in that situation. There's even an account of some religious leaders in Jesus' time who had decided if a wall falls on your neighbor on the Sabbath, you are to walk over and remove just enough rubble to see if he's okay. And if he is, tell him, I'll be back tomorrow. Because to remove one more brick than is necessary would violate the Sabbath. So these are the people that Jesus is dealing with. Right? And so he's walking through, and it says his disciples are hungry, and they begin to pluck the heads off of the grain, and they rub it in their hands to get the seed out, and then they would eat it. Right? For us, I mean, just think of it, they're eating sunflower seeds, okay? That's probably an easier way. They're cracking pistachios, whatever it is that helps you make the connection. And the Pharisees' objection is in the action of getting the seed out, you are working. You're harvesting grain. Now, they're not out there with a sickle. They're not out there with nothing. Grab it, rub it, eat it. And so they begin to protest. And this is an ongoing conversation Jesus has with the Pharisees. They are constantly getting mad at him because he will heal and he will help on the Sabbath. And they see his role as a teacher, as a prophet, and they're saying, well, now Jesus, you're working. Like you're letting these people walk too far to be healed. You should tell them to come back tomorrow so they don't break the Sabbath. And Jesus introduces us to this idea that's really important for us to understand. Mark chapter 2, verse 27 and 28, he says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Jesus is reminding the Pharisees, he's reminding us that the Sabbath is a gift from God to us. It wasn't intended to be a burden that weighs us down, but instead a gift that lifts the weight off of us. To put it another way, the point of the Sabbath is not to keep the Sabbath. It's to let your soul rest. To let your soul be at peace, to stop and to worship no matter what is going on in your life. Right? This is when you begin to embrace that form of rest, then you start to understand why God gave us this law, how Jesus fulfills it for us, and it starts to give life. If you don't, though, then you just turn it into another form of, well, I'm just going to work harder and make sure I do this better. And keeping the Sabbath, like I said earlier, is the easiest of the commandments to turn into a legalistic requirement that you can meet. Because you can adjust your schedule so that you're here every Sunday morning. Right? I was talking with a buddy this week, and he was asking me how the preparation was going. I said, it's great. The biggest temptation I face is to not use the fourth commandment as a club to try to drive up our church attendance. Right? And for some of you, that would be the best application. Jesus will love you more if you'll just show up here on time. Maybe in the 9:15 because the 10:45 is getting a little full. So if you want to be super spiritual, you'll even sit a little closer to the front and slide to the middle so everybody late coming in can say, it's very, very easy to say God will love you more if you do this. And this is the one that we can actually do. I can keep my schedule, I can show up at church, and not only that, I can look down the row and see who's missing, and I immediately know I'm better than them. Right? Some of you grew up in homes like this. Right? It's Sunday. You can't play outside with the neighbors. It's Sunday. The only book you can read is the Bible. It's Sunday. Mom's not cooking, you're having cold cuts. It's Sunday. You can't clean the house, right? I wish my mom would have at least been legalistic in that way. Fine. Right? It's Sunday. You can't. And we become like the Pharisees, and in our attempts to keep the law perfectly, we miss the point entirely. Because you can check all the boxes, you can get the perfect attendance award, but you've never actually learned to rest, and you've never actually learned to worship. And the Sabbath has become just one more burden that you have now laid on yourself. The early church had an interesting way of starting to address some of these issues. One of the ways was they moved from the Sabbath to the Lord's Day. So for the Jews, they worked 6 days and they rested and they worshiped on the seventh day. For the Christians, they began the week with rest and worship, and then they worked 6 days after that. And the reason they did that is because Jesus was resurrected on Sunday, on the first day of the week. So you can read through in the New Testament, and there's a couple different accounts where it talks about they gathered on the Lord's Day. They broke bread on the Lord's Day. And it seems there was a shift where the principle of Sabbath rest and worship remained, and yet it had been moved to Sundays for the new believers. And in doing so, they were reminding themselves, we were created for this, but we only experience it in its fullness through the power and presence of the resurrected Christ in us. Even the move from Saturday to Sunday was a reflection for the early church that Jesus has changed everything. Right? He's changed the whole law. And so now I'm not going to work all week and then at the end of the week do my religious duty to try to please God. But instead, from the beginning of the week, I will start with rest. I will start with worship. And now everything else I do the rest of the week is going to flow out of this. It's such an important idea for us to maintain in our minds as well. Today is not the end of your week, it's the beginning. Everything you're about to do is going to flow out of what God is doing in your life today. As you rest and as you worship, He is preparing you for all that you'll face this week. Jesus makes it even more clear to us in Matthew chapter 11, telling us that it's only through Him we'll experience perfect and final rest. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." In verse 29, He says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." See, Jesus is not there to be our role model. He's not there to say, if you try harder like me, then you can do it. But He's there to say, hey, rest is what you were created for. Rest is what you long for, and you will find it in me and me alone. Walter Brueggemann writes about the Sabbath, and he has just this brilliant statement that kind of sums it up for us today. He says, Sabbath is not simply the pause that refreshes. It is the pause that transforms. And I want you to think about that because it ties perfectly back into what Jesus just said. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. And He doesn't say, and I will model rest for you. He doesn't say, I'll teach you 3 principles about rest and worship. He says, I will give you rest. In me, you will find rest for your souls. And so for us, the practice of gathering together this morning is not just a refresher to give us a little bit more energy moving forward, but it's an opportunity for us to gather on the Lord's Day to remember first the resurrection. That because Jesus has died and rose again, I am forgiven and I have received my new identity. And this new identity is a soul that's at rest. And even as I work, and even as I toil, and even as it's a struggle at times, my soul is at rest. Because all I need, He's provided. And because I know these thorns and thistles, they are just temporary experiences. As I continue to move towards this land where one day everything will fully and finally be lifted off of me. And so the practice of us gathering together for worship is intended to be a practice where weight is continually lifted off, where our eyes are continually lifted up, where we are continually remembering no matter what is going on here, Jesus is greater. So if you'll just bow your heads and close your eyes for me for a minute, I just want you to just imagine, think of those heavy weights that rest on your shoulders this morning. We don't have to think long. We don't have to think hard. For some of you, it goes straight to your finances. For some of us, the weight has a name. It's a broken relationship. For others, it's a sickness. It's the experience of the diagnosis and the treatment and the uncertainty over the future. For some of us, it's just this dark cloud of depression and anxiety that comes and goes, but it gets heavier each time. And the promise of Sabbath rest is not just that God will give you the strength to endure that, but that there is coming a day that He will release it entirely from you. There is coming a day where we will no longer be burdened down by the weight of life, where we will no longer struggle and strive, but we will walk in freedom, in harmony with God, with each other, and with all of creation. And building this rhythm of rest and worship is a way that we participate in that rest even in the middle of the struggle. God has the power to transform the relationship, but if He doesn't, you can still rest and you can still worship. He has the ability to heal your disease, but even if He doesn't, you can still rest and you can still worship. He has the ability to meet all of your needs according to His riches in Christ Jesus. And if the bill remains, you can still rest and you can still worship. Because the same God who created it all is the same God who established the rhythm of rest for us. Jesus, I pray for each one of us. Forgive us, Lord, for our tendency to worship ourselves, our abilities, and our talents. Help us, Lord, to just come this morning with an attitude of surrender and just say, Lord, just take this weight. As we rest and as we worship, may we physically feel the weight being lifted off our shoulders, the weight being released from our hearts, freedom coming to our minds. God, lift our eyes up to see You for who You are and what You have accomplished. Help us to find our peace and our rest in our worship of You. In Jesus' name, amen. If you'll stand with me, the band's going to lead us in a final song, just describing this status that belongs to us because of what Christ has done. As we sing, if you'd like someone to pray with you, our experience of peace always begins with surrendering to Jesus. If you've never surrendered your life to Him, today is your day to do that. You can head out those back doors and to your left. Some of our pastors and prayer team members will be waiting to meet with you. Maybe there are other weights you come in carrying with you this morning. As we pray together, we believe God opens our eyes, the Spirit goes to work, and we begin to see Him for who He is. So if you have needs in your life, we would love to join you in prayer for those. Again, it's out the back doors and to your left. the rest of us, we're going to sing this song. It's just a declaration of our faith and a request of what we want to be able to say when we see God for who He is. Thanks for watching this message. You can view more messages and watch live online on Sundays at christianchapel.com. Have a great week.
Moved by the sound